just a reflection of your importance.
Right, welcome to this version of the database team weekly meeting. It is December already. Wow, that's crazy. All right, there's a couple topics in the not verbalized section. So jumping right to the team topics. So just mostly a reminder for me to look back on the MR for reviewer requirements. I don't know how many people took a look at it. I know Giannis took a look at it and had a lot of good content there. My goal there was to add the requirements for reviewers so that they know they need to provide things like query plan, all the queries, links to the all the required data so that maintainers can be more efficient when they actually get the review. Because a lot of the feedback I gathered from the maintainers was just that it was missing a lot of data. So if we can push that down to the reviewers, it'll make the maintainer time much more efficient. So I'm going to go through and review that MR later on today. Any questions or comments about that?
So I went a little bit crazy on my comments. So if you want me, I can gather them and yeah, like what Fabian does. So if you want me, I can gather them in the subsections and then try to clean it up so we can have a better discussion. I can do it tomorrow.
I was going to spend time on it today, so
Okay.
I can actually organize it. So what Giannis is talking about, I don't know how many people have actually looked at the MR. So I did a quick bulleted list of here are the things that are required, and said, you know, if you need more information about these, please read the section below. Giannis added a lot more good content, but it added the it made the required list quite long, and I was trying to keep that succinct so that reviewers would actually look at it and go, okay, I know I need to provide these things, and if I need more information, I can look down here. So basically providing a TLDR. So it's all fantastic content. I think it just needs to be in the lower section so people will actually read it. So it's just a matter of organizing the content at this point in time. It's all great stuff.
I just started commenting and then everything came to me. I started crying while typing, you know how it is. But yeah, we can move most of those below.
So I will take a look at that later on today. And then we actually got the contract signed and delivered yesterday for Database Lab. So yeah, that's fantastic. That was a lot of work. So we're good to go there. Nick's been great. Procurement team was great on helping us get it over the line. So now the real work begins. I actually created a rollout issue here. These are the simple things we need to do. So letting all of engineering, actually anybody with a GitLab.com email address will now have access to this. So informing them in the right order would be helpful. Nick talked about turning it on last night, but then that would change JoBot, and every query session would now have a link to it, and then we'd probably get inundated with questions. So going to enable it over the weekend. I will hit up all of the keeping yourself informed channels saying, this is the change, this is what you can expect, here's some of the training material, and then Nick will schedule a training and a ask me anything session for next week. And wanted to get some ideas on Slack channel. I think we should set up like a Database Lab help Slack channel so it's specific to that, so we don't clutter other channels like the database channel or the JoBot channel. But I wanted to hear what other people thought, if we could reuse a different channel or not. So any thoughts or preferences on that? I think lots of people are thinking. I see the thinking face on everybody on the screen.
I think that's a very positive interpretation of my current state of being.
So I was going to set up Database Lab help channel.
Would that be for like discussing query plans and stuff like that, or rather like how do I use that? This feature is broken kind of stuff.
How do I use this feature is broken? So we wouldn't change the current channel where people can interact with Slack to do query plans now. I just didn't want to further clutter that up because it's pretty noisy right now and that's work versus help. So I didn't want to overload the one channel. So I was Slack channels are free. If people need to go for help, I figured we'd keep that in its own isolated channel.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Did I miss anything there? No. So if I miss anything, or if you think there's anything else that's important for this part of it, just rolling out Database Lab for everybody else, feel free to comment or just add to the task list there. This doesn't include the next level of work, like getting maintainers up to date with testing data migrations. And I think that's a topic below.
And then before we move on, this is awesome, by the way. So thanks for seeing that through and getting that. I think that really helps us.
Yeah, yeah. As I told Nick yesterday, I'm excited, but also scared because it means now we have to deliver on the next level of things, right? There was always kind of this blocker on what do we do next, and now we know what we need to do next. And part of it is probably me starting the procurement process for the next 6 months evaluation, because I don't think we'll be independent of this within 6 months. So I'll start working on that soon. So then the next level obviously is to provide developers with production-like data, that epic that we have out there. I think we need to update the description and the rollout plan. It sounds like we are moving away from doing the obfuscation. So I think we probably need to remove that from the description of the rollout plan. We can still keep the supporting issues separately if it's something we want to explore in the future, but seems like short term we are not going to pursue obfuscation. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Giannis is probably closest to this right now, but it seems like that's something we don't want to pursue at the moment.
Yeah, I think that we all agree that it's better to try and try it out without anonymization and all the trouble that anonymization brings. So yeah, I can don't know others what others think about it.
I heard from the data storage team today, so the SRE team, that they are also looking to create a database benchmarking environment for their own needs, like to test configuration changes, for example, or anything like that. And they also aim to have a sort of hardened and locked down environment for that. So basically the same idea there. And I'm sure this is going to be a pretty good example of how to do that, or we can probably borrow that or work on that together.
So
Yeah,
they're gonna obfuscate their data in their hardened test environment, benchmarking environment.
No, they're not going to do that, but rather
okay.
Tighten the environment, make sure that nothing escapes. And this is something that we would do the same, I guess.
Okay.
sure. Yeah, and we have the precedent of an incident we had, so we should think about all the results of the discussion there. So yeah. Okay, I will try to move around things in the epic so that we can have some things to discuss over, if you agree.
Yep. All right. And then see, the next topic is setting up the single user server for testing migrations. That one I think had been paused because we were waiting for a decision on Database Lab. So I think I just put this here to say we need to bring this back up and actually start working on it again so we can move towards maintainers testing migrations. This need to be prioritized.
Is this something we want to pull in the current milestone, or what is the priority compared to the other topics?
That's a good question. We do need to prioritize it, but I'm still catching up from last week. I'm not sure where we are in other things, so let's come back to that. We can talk about that under goals for the week. Let's see, and then I just put a note here. We need to create a follow-up issue for guidance for maintainers testing data migration. I don't know how much we've talked about this outside of our team. I'm not sure how much the other maintainers know about this, so we should start communicating this out wider and setting the expectation. So I can create that. Now that Database Labs has been approved, I can update the blueprint. It's pretty stale by now. There was a to-do item in there detailing the current environment, and I think there were some updates on next steps. Jerry wanted diagrams and flowcharts and stuff. I don't know that we'll be able to provide that at this point in time. I'd like to get at least a draft out there, and then we can iterate on it rather than the merge request sitting for the number of weeks it has for now. So that's something else I plan on working on today. I will ping everyone when I get an update there. All right, Andreas, you have the next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think it's an interesting topic. There's nothing pressing behind that, but we were basically seeing a increase in traffic on the database. Data storage team was picking that up, and they perceived a 10% increase in terms of transactions per second. And then they were basically wondering, like, where is it coming from? And if we had a way to tell if a certain feature that was being released recently or something like that would have triggered that, right? And we don't really have a good way of seeing that today. And I wonder if we can sort of predict what kind of impact those certain features have. Just wanted to throw it out there, like a topic that is kind of interesting today. Because from a database reviewer perspective, we're always thinking about the performance. We check, like, is it the best way to do that? Is it efficient? Are there any anti-patterns or stuff like that? But overall, since we're so like iterative on things, it's kind of hard to tell what the ultimate impact of certain feature is on the site. Yeah, that's just something to think about if we have good ideas to tackle that.
I don't have a good idea. I can tell you memory team's looking into something similar. So we have a goal to try and get like the minimum footprint of a single GitLab instance down to 2 gigs. And once we actually reach that goal, that's a point in time goal, right? We've done it for that release of GitLab, and as new features get added, we will have this problem on memory usage. Like a new feature could get added that could then blow us out of that limit again. So we're looking into ways to set up an environment to constantly test that threshold to catch when we exceed our new minimum footprint. And we are just now brainstorming ideas on it. So we don't have a good example, but we're considering the same concerns.
Just make it a hard limit. I'm gonna say 2 gigs. Anything new needs to fit in, and then we'll have fun. This is
you broke it. Go fix it.
Yeah. No. As a side note, a friend of mine works for Microsoft, and that is how Windows operates, because they have a hard requirement to be able to ship Windows on a DVD release. So if you're going to ship it on a DVD, there is limited amount of space, right? And not everybody downloads stuff from the internet. So if you review Paint, right, and all of a sudden it's twice the size, it breaks the budget. I thought that was pretty pretty harsh. It's an interesting requirement.
It is. So mostly the early ideas are a Docker environment, set up a quick, 2 gig footprint and run regular tests. And we're working with Grant on that one. But it's mostly in the idea stage at the moment for the memory team.
And can I ask you something? Could we use Marginalia or something like that to have live stats on how things are and relate those to controllers and specific features?
That would be nice. There is also in addition to Marginalia, there is also I think we just added that recently, that you'd be able to tag a feature category for a certain controller, something like that. But it's kind of hard to tell the difference between an increase in traffic or user behavior or that, or adding certain features, but you will be able to sort of see over time how much a certain feature category impacted the traffic, or what the portion of traffic for a certain category was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's related to our discussion in general about performance, query performance, and this is going one level up, which is pretty interesting. So it's we started discussing about queries, we were discussing about controllers, and now features may have you know, more things to do, clustered together. So yeah.
Should we just throw together an issue for talking about this in the future, Andreas?
Sure, I can do that.
All right. All right, Fabian, you're up next.
Oh yeah, so for the sake of transparency, Yannis and I now meet regularly and talk a little bit more about sort of product questions, and also with the focus on, you know, product questions for memory and database. And there's one link if you're interested in sort of how features can be modeled as from the customer perspective. That's quite interesting. It's called the Kano model. We had a discussion earlier on, you know, where do sort of database features fall, right? And Yannis made the point that, you know, many of the features that are in database are kind of must-be's, like things that customers just expect to work, right? They need to work, and if they don't work, people get unhappy, but nobody is going to be particularly delighted for a specific feature because they just expect it to do what it's supposed to do, right? So a question for us is also, once we have those features under control, what are some potential future areas where we can actually potentially build some functionality into the product that is interesting and delightful for users, either our own developers or other developers. And Yannis and I quickly discussed, and you can add some color to that in a second. It's like, maybe there are some things that we do ourselves at the moment that are hard, right, and tedious and not as delightful as they could be. For example, how we review our own database changes, right? And maybe there are some opportunities to build functionality into the product to make that a lot better, right? And we don't know what that is or how it could look like, right? But I think there are actually some interesting potential opportunities in the future to say, look, you know, if Andreas needs to review a database change, there are just a lot of things that are tedious, right? Like how can we make it easier, right? And that was just a discussion we had in the morning. I really enjoyed it, and I just wanted to quickly sort of share it, right? And say, like, these are some of the things that you know, we are thinking about, and there's a lot of problem validation to do and these kinds of things. But you know, in the long term, that's maybe a direction that we could consider. Yannis, maybe you can add your thoughts.
Yeah, so the question, so starting with the Kano model, so it defines those must-be's, where whatever we do, we just try not to make users dissatisfied. So we can work, we just work in order not to break the database, not to lose data, but if we are doing our work correctly, they will just not be, you know, dissatisfied, but they will never be delighted. Like, you know, if we lower our queries to 5 milliseconds, no one will see it. Okay, maybe some admins will know, but it's not like a crazy change that we will advertise outside of, you know, our optimizations. And then there is this type of category which is called attractive, or where even if you do the bare minimum, people will get excited. Like, for example, I don't know, the first time that we use Google Maps, at least the first time I used Google Maps was amazing. And the JavaScript interface or something like that, or the first time you use search. And the idea and the question there is, can we have an attractive feature for the database team or the memory team in general? So what's an attractive feature? What's a feature that people don't expect? And so, for example, in our internal cycles, the fact that, and what Fabian was discussing in the morning, is that the fact that allowing developers to test against production data is an attractive feature, is something that the moment we have it is amazing. And that was my experience also, even with Jobot. The moment I joined the team and I was able to test against using database labs, it was amazing, because this is not something that we are doing, everybody does. And extending that, could we have something similar, for example? That's one of the ideas. For the product, as a product category, this is a huge thing. It's not like a 1 month idea, but could we have, as a category in GitLab, database reviewing? So you are inside you are reviewing code, and you can also, from inside the GitLab interface, you can just click, review the queries, generate the plans, check how they run against your production. Let's go crazy here. And yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that would be very cool if it could, I mean, moonshot, right? Automatically detect database changes and present you with a query plan when you change the code. So that would be very cool.
Yeah. No, I think here the things like that, we have no idea how this would work, right? But I think it is interesting to think about these things, and then, you know, maybe that'll take some years, right, to actually like get to a maturity level where this is really amazing. But I think Yannis and I can do some work, and maybe there are some small iterations that we can do where, I don't know, you know, it becomes easier to, and I'm not really sure what I'm talking about here either. It's like, I know that people often need to explain their Postgres queries, right? They go to an external service to do this, right? And then post links to those things, right? That's inconvenient, right? It's like, why can't I do that in product, for example? And why can't I just get my explain, and then that gets actually surfaced to, you know, to people that need to see it easily, right? And those are maybe smaller things that are a lot more feasible. And those, I think, then are essentially end user facing, right? And that's quite exciting, right? Because then you're addressing sort of usability issues for folks that need to interact with the database, and which is essentially all of you. So maybe you can think about all of the things that annoy you about the current, you know, database reviewing experience, right? And those are maybe things that we can think about how to fix, right? But that's, you know, that's just for transparency, and so you know what Yannis and I also discuss. Maybe it's interesting to vocalize that rather than it being a complete black box.
Cool,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that.
And
it's often,
there was, yeah.
I just thought it's often really the small things that remove the tediousness from those reviews. Like even just having a, I don't know, a query formatter in comments, like, you know, mark down SQL and then you put the query in that's get formatted. If that gets formatted, that already helps. And if that integrates with other systems like plan visualization or so, that would be awesome. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and that's just an idea, right? But if we can, I think that's maybe one of the things Yannis and I can do over the next months is sort of exploring that idea space, doing a few interviews with folks who work in that space, right? And actually validating that those things are problematic enough to warrant sort of investment in that area, right? And then, you know, when that happens, you can start thinking about the first iteration, right? And I think that doesn't mean we don't need to do all of the other things as well. They're super important, right? If sort of features that are expected don't work, people get annoyed, and that's really bad, right? So, you know, we still need to do that, but I think ideally also for us, if we can do these other things, you know, on top of that at some point, it's also quite nice, right? Because you all of a sudden, you have an easier connect, right, with what people are thinking about.
And so for completeness, after our discussion with Fabian, I went back and checked the maintainer review issue. We had an issue where maintainers were writing complaints and things that they would want to change. And there is a unicorn thread by Alper where he defined everything that we could do for the next 20 years if we had 100 people. So he also had something like that. Like that.
Well, we have 1 year and 5 people, right? So we could probably get a bunch of stuff done, right?
Yeah, thanks for that overview. That was great. All right, jumping to goals from last week. So this is actually a 2-week roll up since Pat and I were gone most of last week, but this is what we had from our last meeting. So let's get right into it. So audit event, I think there was a goal to get that rolled out yesterday. Is that right?
Yeah, there was. Andreas brought up an issue at the 11th hour.
Yeah, sorry about that. Asking
Yeah,
annoying questions at the end.
it was a fair point because I think there is a problem there. So we haven't really discussed the ultimate solution, but there's one of the code changes we're rolling out at the same time as the migration could potentially cause an issue. So the safest thing to do really is split it in 2 releases and roll out the code change now, wait till the next milestone, and then do the actual swap migration. Maybe that's a little too cautious, but it's really hard to get a good view of what could break. So I think we're maybe at a blocker right there.
Is that because of the primary key issue?
Yeah, the primary key.
Okay.
So yeah,
what's the quick summary of the split?
Yeah, the problem is that when we do the migration and we change and we swap the tables, the audit event table has a composite key in the partition case because it has the ID and the date as a key. And Rails does not work correctly with composite keys. So we have to set in the Rails code that the primary key is only the ID, so that everything else works as expected. And what Andreas thought about was that after we release, the way we release, we do live releases, we first run the migrations, then deploy the code. But in between the moment we have the migration and the code is deployed to all the servers, some servers have the old code. If one of those servers reloads the schema, it will see that the new schema that has a composite primary key, but it will have the old code that does not have the directive that tells it that the primary key in reality is the ID only. Mm-hmm. And we need that in order for some finders to work in Rails, a last and first calls, because it is ordering by primary key and some other calls. And from our checks, in this rare occasion, things may break. Patrick, anything I forgot?
No, that's right. Yeah, there's one area in the app specifically creating a merge request approval rule that I definitely can recreate that it breaks because it can't create the audit event when the approval rule was created. So there's definitely at least one potential production problem that could happen. Mm. And we just really can't say. There's a lot of other failures in the tests that are, a lot of them seem to be noise, but it's hard to exactly trace down what other issues there might be because there's just things breaking in a lot of places.
And some
mostly
API
in the
500s.
Yeah.
And we have some API 500s in the test, which is also.
So when you say split it into 2 releases, that mean 2 separate milestones? We ship the first release and then we have to wait a month and then ship the final release for audit event partitioning?
Right.
Okay.
We can't just do the migration as a post deploy, can we?
I mean, we could. I don't think there's any reason we can't. I think our reasoning why we did it as a normal deploy is we were a little scared of the schema caching, and we thought, well, if we do it as a regular migration, then like worst case scenario, the servers are all rebooting anyway, so that will kind of solve the issue. If we do it as a post deploy, then it might be more risky on that end.
Yeah, we have to discuss that a little bit. It was literally at 11th hour, at least for me, PM.
Okay, so new target is the first release at the end of this milestone, and then the second release next milestone.
Yeah, that would be the plan, I guess, unless we think of a better solution between now and then.
And maybe for a bit wider context, I think what is unfortunate for us here is that we don't have a way of reasoning about live upgrades other than like trying to figure out what breaks or what could potentially break when we do it. But there is, when we test things in CI or elsewhere in staging, there is no good situation where we don't have the same situation as we do in production, where we want to have live upgrades or no downtime upgrades. And we also ship that to customers, or that is a feature, a GitLab feature, no downtime upgrades. But we never test for them. And this has bitten us before, where we just didn't anticipate that something would break in a no downtime upgrades scenario. And we've gotten since better at this, at sort of anticipating when those things break. But it's still hard, and it's manual work, and you have to really think about it. And this is why things take so long. Like right now, we could have, like, if we thought about that last week, then we could have sneaked it into the last release. It's just one line of code, right? But it's really hard to tell those things.
For future iterations, now we know in the first release, while we initiate the partitioning, we will also add the schema directive for the primary key, and that's it. That was so simple. If we knew about it, we have an issue, Andrea, where we were discussing. I'm sorry, Fabian. We have an issue where we were discussing Andreas' idea. I think that Andreas has created an issue at some point. We were discussing how can we test those live updates, where we would have to run migrations and then keep a server in the old version, test, switch to a new version, and because there are 3 states, so it's old code, old database, old code, new database, new code, new database, and then post-migration. So there are some steps. And there is also the overlap of a new server and an old server. So because a couple of our, the worst problems that we have found were new servers updating with the new data, old servers trying to use the new data, and something breaking there, which is even worse.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this, Andreas and Yannis. So this is just a connection that I'm making. I'm on a separate quest in a different part of my life with Geo, where we frequently have issues with testing complex sort of operations, because you can't test them in CI, right? You have to do it manually. And in sort of self-hosted deployments, that means often spinning up a 3K or 10K reference architecture manually and then doing stuff, right? And that's the test. And so I'm working with quality a little bit at the moment to get to a point where you can have for example, a 3K reference architecture, right? That you can automate some of these zero downtime upgrades against a specific release or a nightly package or something to actually evaluate these processes, also the R failovers and so on and so forth. And I wonder if that kind of setup, where you say, okay, we have, a 3K reference architecture here, and we are going to do, we always perform a 0 downtime upgrade, against the latest version, right, in that specific sequence, and see if there's actually no downtime, right, and if it works. Would that address some of those concerns, or is it completely different?
No, I think that's exactly what we're missing for the no downtime
Yes.
upgrades as well.
Yeah.
Just for GitLab itself. Yeah.
Because I think this is, in my mind, a huge gap in our overall quality assessment. And I'm trying to get to a point where that is, that's a thing, right? Because I have processes in Geo where that's important, right? I have, like, there are general distribution things like 0 downtime upgrades or whatnot, right? And that's not testable in CI at the moment. And that means it's essentially either you anticipate problems and good for you, right? Or you test it manually, which is extremely time intensive, right? And manual and cumbersome, and people hate it, so it doesn't happen. So you need an automatic way with an appropriate cadence to do that and get a report and say, hey, we've tried this and it broke, and here's what broke, and then figure it out. And so that's good to hear, because I can add that to my list of concerns, right?
The other way to look at that is we basically support many different upgrade paths. So you can go from one GitLab version to the other. There is many different paths to do that, and this is for self-hosted installs, and this is already a big problem, right? The number of paths is very, very large. And then thinking about GitLab.com, it becomes even more complex, because we don't really do releases, but we do regular deploys. And in addition to the regular builds, you would have to do this no downtime upgrade testing for taking the next step. So before you actually deploy it, you might want to validate the change in the no downtime testing. And this is very hard to deal with, I think, if you want to catch all the things. And for the no downtime testing, it really depends on which changes you package into a particular deploy. But having an environment where you can test a certain change, I think that would already be a good step. It doesn't cover all the things, but today we're just blind on that end.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, because I think what we are struggling is also with sort of a complexity explosion. Right, there are too many permutations of doing things, right? And you cannot hold that complexity in your brain anymore. At least I can't. Right, that is, people will miss things, right? Where it's like, oh, we did this first, and then we did that, and that broke, but nobody thought of it, and then you are in a mess. And so I think having, ideally at some point, an environment that constantly sort of permutates what people can do, right, and just surfacing that would be great. The first step is just, this is the thing that we test, right? And at least we know that, that would be caught on a weekly cadence or something like that, right?
I think maybe in this case, I'm not even sure that if we had no downtime testing, then it would catch it, because that was something that I manually tested for already, because we were concerned about running the old code and the new code against the new schema. But there's an additional wrinkle here, which is that Rails is caching the schema information. So this particular issue would only be highlighted if the old server is running, and then that server reboots before it's deployed, or the app restarts or something, which then causes it to refresh the cache. So that's something that no downtime testing might not even, under normal circumstances, might not even detect. So
you're right.
Yeah.
So in summary, that's our paranoia speaking, right?
Yeah, but in my experience, we've had these issues with customers, and then it's an emergency ticket, and figuring out some kind of, caching is always difficult from my experience, right? And I completely agree, but I think unfortunately we are too popular, right? And now somebody somewhere is going to have that issue eventually, right? And that drives me a little bit around at night,
And if I may add, for GitLab.com, the fact that we are doing Canary deployments prolongs the time that old version of the code and new versions of the code live together over the same database. So,
Good point. Yeah.
so what we were discussing here, this is not a possibility of a server restarting just during a couple of seconds or a minute where you deploy. This is way longer, especially for GitLab.com, which increases. It's still something that, yeah, it may happen. It's not that often, but it's something that happens, that we have more time to do that.
Or if we were able to dynamically scale the site, then this is something that we would have to deal with. Right, like add it,
of course.
you would have to deal with the fact that you add processes throughout.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. The moment you add more servers.
So question, is this something that we're going to have to contend with for every table we want to partition?
No, we know now the process of solving this. So next time around, we know that we should just add this to include this small update in the first release when we initiate the schema, the partitioning and the loading of the partition tables, because it does not affect how the current relation works.
Okay, let me rephrase. So for any future partitioning rollout, are we going to have this split deployment? I'm thinking about.
No, we will move it in the initial. So we won't need 3 deployments. We will need 2. But this small change, we will move it in the initial release.
Okay. I'm just thinking about when we actually get to the point of enablement and we have all the information that are needed for other teams to implement their own partitioning. So making sure that we're capturing this part of it so they don't encounter the same issue that we've encountered at the 11th hour or ship a production outage with this, right? So are we capturing this step somewhere, or when we actually do enable other teams to do the work?
Yeah, I can update the partitioning documentation to cover that.
Yeah.
I will propose, let's do a round of asynchronous discussion, the issue with Andreas and Patrick, to make sure that we have all the solutions covered, that there is no option to do it in this release, and then yes.
Okay. And I got to drop off in about 5 minutes here. So moving on to the next stuff, Giannis, you had a goal to finish the events proposal.
Oh, it's so finished that it has been moved to 2 milestones away. It's completely uber finished.
Are we rescheduling that then? Is that what I'm hearing?
We have already, yeah.
Okay.
You know.
All right. Next one.
Yep, still ongoing. It's in my other PC, but it cannot upload it.
All right. And then split schema validation issue and specific tasks.
Yeah, we have done that.
All right. So goals for this week, I've already put mine down on there. Go from the top, Andreas.
I'm working on the re-indexing, and there's a bit of development side, and then Jose and I, we were talking about re-indexing a couple of really large indexes, and for most of them we can use the tooling, and perhaps that is something we can do this week. But I still have to create a change issue for that. But Jose, maybe we can catch up on that later.
All right. Giannis.
Yeah, initiate the first step of integer 4 to integer 8 for events ID. So this will be a 2 release. We need 2 releases. I want to finish the first release. Okay. A second thing is what I talked about above, about the discovery effort on user pain points. I have to. This is one of my to-dos.
Okay. Anything else?
I would also want to, now that we're back on track with the Epic on testing with production data, to go there and add a proper issue for how we will do it without anonymization, so that we can start discussing it.
All right, Pat.
Yeah, I guess it depends a little bit on prioritization of now that we have the database labs, where we think that falls in the overall things we should be working on. There's a couple other, unassigned issues right now in the milestone. There's one with the CI check for migrations, adding some primary keys to some tables that are missing them. But I guess, do we feel that any of those are higher priority than, working on the database lab, getting developer access to that? Or do we not know enough about that right now to move forward?
So I have tried to have in the issues in the list based on the priorities that we discussed last week. So more or less after our assigned and the ones that we have already declared as deliverables, I have tried to have them in the order that we discussed them. So it's easier. Okay, so in that case, the set up the single server for testing migrations is the top priority. Okay, so I guess it's just a question of how far we want to go with. The server is set up, it's usable, it's a very incredibly manual process that's kind of error prone right now to be able to use it. So maybe there's a middle ground there of something that we can build a little bit of scripting around it without going crazy, so that people can use it a little more easily and not in a way that's unsafe, like having the firewall down and then they're accidentally doing things they shouldn't be doing. I think that we should go with, through security also as part of this process. So we may have most of the things there already done, but should we do an audit also there?
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah,
that would. I agree. I think that's the top thing that should be worked on next. Just because we do have a limited amount of time on Database Lab. It is 6 months, but we've seen some of the things we're working on can take some time. So the sooner we can get that available to others, the sooner we can get feedback on. And we can talk more about what's needed next asynchronously. But yeah, I think security audit makes sense.
Just for my understanding, we're still going to address the primary key overflow risk relatively soon, though. Just because
that's what Giannis is working on.
That's what Giannis. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah.
Is that
tricky? Yeah.
Is that going to take up all of your time this week, Pat?
I guess it really depends what all we're planning on doing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we can talk more about that in the issue itself. I don't know about other folks, but I have to fall off now. So
I need to fall off as well. Thanks for the nice meeting. Enjoyed seeing everyone.
Thanks, Fabian.
Bye.
It looks like Pat and Giannis have added some discussions within the retro topic. So take a look. I'm planning on adding a summary to the engineering-wide retro later on today. So if there's anything else you want to add, and we can spend some more time talking about it on Thursday if time allows. But get your feedback in, because it needs to be summarized before tomorrow so that Darva can do her roll-up and be prepared for Monday's engineering-wide retro. Right. Thanks. Cool.
Hey, Jose.
Hey, everyone. Just bringing here, Andreas, I wrote in an issue about the select one. Like I saw some implementation somewhere that Jerry mentioned that they disabled this in the Ruby code. Do you think this is possible here? No.
I saw that today. I'm not completely sure if this is kind of changing the way the application works with the database. I'm not completely sure about all the things. The article that Jerry mentioned, that was from 7 years ago, I think. So it's definitely needs updating, but certainly an avenue that we can look into. But it needs a little bit more looking into, I think. Did you see about the alternative, or just as an idea? We have this. So this is about the. I don't know if everybody remembers that we have a very large volume of select one queries coming into the database. Like, Jose, do you know how many? Like
6,000 to 10,000 queries per second.
Right.
So our TPS, the highest is like 60,000. So we have like a big, large number of these. And I saw your idea, like, and I think the idea is great. Like, you could stop this in the PG bouncer level. But like the Emmanuel mentioned that it's not available, this feature in PG bouncer or in Odyssey. Do you have any workaround for it?
No, I don't. And I just thought maybe that is something that would perhaps be interesting for PG Bouncer or Odyssey to support. So basically, you would be able to catch those queries in the middle, in the load balancing layer, so they don't hit the database, but basically the application knows that it has a good database connection. I have no idea what the effort it would be to add that, or but maybe it's interesting for PG Bouncer or Odyssey folks to discuss a feature request like that. I don't know.
There was just did I Google here in 30 seconds, like something interesting maybe.
And then it's also the Rails side that uses that as a keep alive.
Yeah, the idea there is exactly that in the post. I can send to you as well, yes. Whichever one, please. It's like the select one is like it's verifying all the time. And like 7 years ago, who uses Ruby on Rails said, well, I don't need this step. Let's jump off and execute the statement directly, more or less. But, and this is what I'm saying here, like you have like some routing for queries, so this would be nice. But this will need to be tested and so on. So.
Yeah, that reads interesting.
Also, in general, do you see, guys, any point that we could reduce the, let me tell you why I'm doing all of this. We do an evaluation monthly on the status of the database. In the last 2 months, the numbers are starting to get a bit more high. We have before a threshold that was going to 50, let's say tops TPS, 50,000 transactions per second. 1 month ago, we started to see spikes to 53 dot something. And last month, we reached 60,000. So my fear is like if you reach over 80K, we can start to have a degradation that then can take the database down, or have a really bad degradation that will start to something context switch like crazy, and by degrade everything to a point that we are not reaching SLAs or going down. So like then I start to get crazy to reduce TPS. So, or find what are we having TPS, because we have some context switching, blah, 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 and so on. We are doing the bottleneck on PG bouncer, we are using resources in general. My question is, do you see any kind of caching that we could do with some enumeration tables or things like this? I'm saying just to reduce cost to the database, you know? Or are we not doing this already? Do you have a better understanding?
There was an issue recently about the Rails query caching. So basically, Rails has a way of when you run the same query twice in the same process, then it would return a cached result. And as far as I know from that issue, that query cache doesn't work always, or it was disabled for some reason.
I think that when it was going to the PG bouncer, it was not working. It was working only when it was going, when it was choosing the master. You're talking about this issue from the memory team.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right? Yeah. So I think that it was a pretty interesting issue. So the cache was working when the master was chosen. I'm not sure. And when we were choosing anything else, we will not use the cache. So we will send 2 queries or 3 queries.
And my
Maybe
second question, one will be for these enumerations, I have to look more at the start statements in the lower rows, but I think it's a small win. But the main one, do you think we can try to change some patching structure that we have nowadays? What I'm saying, suppose, we're just supposing here, we have a query that is like return 1, 2 rows, but we're executing 20 times. Perhaps we can do one query fetching more data and doing less calls. I don't know so well the application, so that's what I'm asking here. I don't know if this sounds basic or not.
This is so this is basically what we would call n+1 queries, right? Where you, or at least goes in that direction. That is an example for that, where you instead of running 10 queries to grab 10 rows, you try to do one query basically. And I'm pretty sure that we have a lot of these issues in the code base. Been fixing a lot of them as well, but there are surely some of them.
And nowadays we try to catch almost all those problems and try to advise authors to just run large queries instead of a lot of small queries. But yeah, sometimes. And there are the asynchronous nature sometimes. So you may have the front end sending 10 requests instead of 1. This is also so the optimization. We have to.
Okay, guys, I have to jump into another call. I'm sorry to jump out now, but we talk, okay?
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just stop the recording now, I guess. Unless...
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
No. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, YouTube.